Let's talk about spicy neutral single eyeshadows. These are all from different indie brands. And of course, I have to give credit to Riley, aka Seeking Shifts, for really coining the term and using it to describe eyeshadows specifically. And these are all also great one and done eyeshadows. Some of these are wet look kind of eyeshadows. If anything, probably most of these are great one and done wet looking eyeshadows. And what makes these spicy is that they have just a bit of dimensionality to them, whether it is slightly maybe a dual chrome effect, but not necessarily multi-chromes, or they have a lot of different sparkles throughout them. So these are the shades I chose from my over 1,200 single eyeshadows. There's something special about these. Now, some of these might be a little bit less neutral per se. Some of them might be a little bit more purple, maybe a little bit more green. But regardless, I think that they make a great one and done shadow. And I will be showing these by color. There are definitely some shades between different brands that are a bit similar. So I want to make sure that they are swatched together. Pretties for your face, Devinah, ShineBySD, and Glam eyeshadows were purchased by me. The rest were sent in PR. So let's get right into the swatches. So I'm starting off with Kia. This is from Terra. And this is a beautiful reddish brown with bright blue flecks throughout it. And I'm going to be swatching with my arm this way. Next shade is Soulmate, and this one is from Touch of Glam Beauty. When I first got this shade, it was very flaky and chunky and just strange. They did send me a replacement, so I did get like a dud. And this one is a much more kind of cooler tone brown with a lot of blue throughout it. And it is definitely a little bit more on the chunky side. Next shade is Super Luminous. And this one is not necessarily like a neutral per se, but I feel like because of the flash of pink, and I think depending on the mattes you would pair with it, it would be a little bit more of an amped up neutral leaning look. And next shade is Sun's Glow from Terra, and this one is so perfect as a one and done. It is just so ultra sparkly, just a tiny bit of a larger particle size, and it's what makes it really sparkly. And this one has a pretty neutral, maybe just slightly warm leaning mid-tone brown base with a greenish gold flash straight on. It is super ultra dimensional. And the last shade in this set is Ferric, and this one is from Clionadh. And this one is such an interesting, again, a little bit more greenish leaning neutral shade, but it does have a reddish orange sparkles throughout it. It's a very dimensional shade and it's very sparkly. It does have a larger particle size. So here's the first set of spicy neutrals. The next set is Gold, maybe leaning slightly olive. So this is Afterglow, and this is from ShineBySD, and this is ultra smooth. I mean, look at that shine, definitely a wet look kind of shadow. And I see a bunch of like reddish orangey flecks throughout it, but it does flash aqua and green, and it has a lighter base. Next shade is Glow, which is also from ShineBySD. This one has a slightly larger particle size. It is more sparkly, but it does smooth out. And it's actually quite similar to that shade. I think the biggest distinction between them is the base is slightly different, and I see actually a little bit more of a reddish shift in Glow. Next shade is Festive, and this is from Glam Cosmetics. It's pretty much exactly the same thing as Glow, maybe just slightly less textured, ever so slightly. Next shade is Sunbeam, and this is from Terra Cosmetics, and this one's also actually very similar. I feel like this is a comparison swatch video now. The particle size is definitely the largest out of all of these, but it is extremely similar. I think what makes it different from these other shades is it definitely doesn't have the bright red sparkles throughout it. I don't really see red in there. Next shade is Twilight from Terra, and this one's pretty different from the rest of these shades. This one has a little bit of a pale gold as well as a bright gold and like a taupey base to it, shifting to green. And the last shade is XO5 from Terra, and this one doesn't necessarily belong in here, but it's kind of looks like it's yellow in the pan, but it's definitely a lot less yellow once you swatch it out. This one I see green, purple, and aqua sparkles throughout it. The next set are the greens. This is Glow Up, and this is from ShineBySD. And this one has a little bit of a beige kind of base to it, but it's definitely more on the sheer side. And I see blue flecks throughout it, but it does have a little bit of a flash of green straight on. Next to it is Flash, and this one's also from ShineBySD, same collection. And this one's more of a true kind of olivey green with pink flecks throughout it, very dimensional shade. Gleam Stream, also from ShineBySD. This one's a little bit more of a punchy type of spicy neutral. It has a light brownish yellow leaning base with a greenish aqua flash straight on and more of a bluish shift. It is extremely well looking, extremely smooth. And we have Incandescence, also from ShineBySD. And this one has, again, a little bit of a neutral brown base to it. And I see orange and blue flecks throughout it. Next up is Alloy, and this one is from Devinah. I'm going to add another layer. This one has an olive tone to it. And I see orange and bright green sparkles throughout it. Next is Electron, also from Clionadh. And it shifts to green, and I see like pale pink kind of flecks throughout it. Next up is Stellar Evolution, and this one is from Terra. Hopefully I don't run out of space. This one's pretty sheer, has a little bit of like an almost grayish green tone to it, and I see some silver sparkles throughout it. Next is Silver Lining from ShineBySD, very smooth, no texture at all. I see green and pink flecks throughout it and has a very taupe base to it. Next is Synthesis, and this is from Clionadh. This is a beautiful olivey green based shadow with a bunch of flecks throughout it. I see blue and I think it's orange. And the last shade in this set is Universal Light. This is from Terra. And this one has a little bit of like a almost teal base to it. And I see a ton of bright, almost neon reddish pink flecks throughout it. Very dimensional shade, and this one is Flaky. Moving on to the pinks, we have Luminosity from ShineBySD, and this shade is slightly a little bit more texture, but it does smooth out completely and very easily. And this one is almost like a little bit of a yellowy base, and it has pink and purple flash straight on, and I see purple flecks throughout it. Next shade is Saga. This one is from Oden's Eye. It definitely looks a little bit more purple in the pan. And this one is a little bit similar, but the base is a little bit more pink, and it has green and blue and pink flecks throughout it. Then there's Entropy from Clionadh. This one is really vibrantly pink, straight on, shifting to gold. And it does have just ever so slightly a little bit of a base. Next shade is Line of Queens. I think this one's for sure a little bit more of a colorful type of neutral. So it does flash kind of pink straight on. It has a purple base to it, and it shifts to green to kind of blue and aqua in there as well. Callisto, and this one is from Terra, and this is like a peach, bunch of green and orange flecks throughout it. And then Ice Phantom from Devinah. This is one of their new shades, and this one's very, very smooth. It's a warm peach base with green and pink flecks throughout it, ultra dimensional. Next up are the purples. Twinkling from ShineBySD. Super ultra wet metallic looking shade. Ever so slightly larger particle size. Really, really beautiful. Very dimensional. I see pink, purple, and blue. Tease, also from ShineBySD. I think this one's pretty similar. It does have a little bit of a different base, and the shift is also just a slightly bit different, and the dimensionality is not as prominent as in Twinkling, but they are very similar. Tease is more of a pinky purple. Confetti from Glam Cosmetics. And this one is for sure a little bit similar to Twinkling, but the tone is different. I see a lot of blue and purple flecks throughout it with maybe a little bit of like aqua or green in there. So it does look actually a bit different. Party, also from Glam Cosmetics. I think this one's pretty on par with Twinkling for sure. Pretty similar to Twinkling, however, it has like a pale yellow reflect to it, which Twinkling does not. My shade is Violet Sky from Terra. This one's very, very purple, bright pink and green flecks throughout it. The pink flecks are larger particle size than the green. The green is more like a sheen. Ascension from Clionadh. I'm gonna add another layer. Definitely heavily purple base, especially if you build it up like I just did. And I see kind of like a pale gold yellow straight on. Chloe from Oden's Eye. This one's pretty sheer, and it seems like it might just be like a purple, but it has blue flecks throughout it. And I also think I see some like kind of really light yellow flecks throughout as well. It's very dimensional. And the last shade from this set is Calicore, and this is from Pretty's For Your Face. And this one's very, very dry, kind of chunky, does not swatch the best. I have not used this shade yet, so I can't speak on how it applies, but it does seem like it's a little bit harder to use. It definitely has a little bit of sparkle in there, but it is not the most shiny by any means, and it has a light beige kind of base to it with purple and blue flecks throughout it. For this next set of shades, there is a lot, so I'm going to try them on one arm. So this is Fireworks from Glam Cosmetics. This one has like kind of a little bit of a greenish yellow base to it with a bunch of pink and blue sparkles throughout. Super dimensional shade. Here is Lavish from ShineBySD, and this one is very similar. I think the bases are extremely similar as well as the sparkles. If anything, maybe Lavish has a little bit more aqua sparkles throughout it. And then Stunner, which you may know, one of my favorite shadows from 2024. This one has red and green flecks throughout it with a warmer, slightly darker base than the other two shades. It's almost like a reddish brown base. Charm from ShineBySD. This one's a little bit like pale pink with bright pink sparkles throughout. Moonbeam. I feel like this one doesn't belong in here now that I'm swatching it, but it does have a bunch of red flecks throughout it. And I see green as well. Skink from Glam Cosmetics. This one has a little bit of a brownish pink leaning base to it, and it flashes green. Celebration from Glam Cosmetics. This one's a little bit looser in the pan. I see a bright pink flash throughout with a light brown base and kind of like a pale yellow straight on. Scintillating, and this is from ShineBySD. This one has a little bit more green in it for sure, but it has pink flecks throughout. Sparkle from Glam Cosmetics. And these are pretty much the same. I would say these are dupes of each other. I'm going to build up the scintillating shade just a little bit more. It maybe has a little bit more green flecks throughout it, but they're very similar. Exothermic, also a fave from 2024 from Clionadh. This is very, very warm, orangey yellow with green and pink flecks throughout it. And the last two shades are kind of outliers. This is the Gobbling from Touch of Glam Beauty. And this one's got like a plumish taupey base to it with pink flecks throughout. And the last shade is actually a highlighter from Terra that I repanned. And this is Haze of the Moon. And I mean, look at this one. It's got a brown yellow leaning base to it with blue flecks throughout. It is so stunning. So those are all of my spicy neutral eyeshadows. Let me know in the comments below what your favorite spicy neutral is, and if you have any of these shades. And if you enjoy this kind of content, I have a lot of videos up like this. Some of them will be up on the screen so you can keep watching, and if not, then thank you so much for watching this video. I hope to see you next time.